Egyptian President Sisi reaffirms full support for Palestinian rights on International Day of Solidarity. The Israeli occupation commits a new massacre in the town of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip, killing at least 10 civilians and injuring others. Lebanon's national news agency reports 4 Israeli tanks entered the western side of the border village of Khiam. Good evening, and you're now watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has reaffirmed full support for Palestinian people's legitimate rights on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The official spokesperson for the presidency stated that President Sisi sent a message to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas expressing Egypt's unwavering support, particularly in light of the Gaza crisis. He highlighted the international community's failure to stop the violence and stressed the importance of recognizing the Palestinian struggle for their rights. President Sisi called for revitalizing the two-state solution based on international resolutions aiming to end the occupation and establish a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Egypt has reiterated its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people, commending their steadfast resilience in the face of systematic violations by Israeli occupation forces, which continue under the international community's watch. Egypt renewed its call for collective international efforts to end the Israeli occupation, enabling Palestinians to establish their independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Marking International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, Egypt expressed regret that the occasion coincides with the brutal aggression Palestinians currently endure. The country emphasized the urgent need for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and unconditional access to humanitarian aid. The Israeli occupation has committed a new massacre in the town of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip, killing at least 10 civilians and injuring others. The occupation bombed the house that shelters displaced people on the Manshia street in Beit Lahia, killing and wounding several civilians. Israeli forces also targeted civilians who tried to recover the bodies of victims and transport the wounded to the hospital using a wagon pulled by a sledgehammer, raising the number of victims to at least 10. The civil defense in Gaza has urgently called for fuel supplies to resume its operations effectively. The organization revealed that 99% of its capabilities are currently disabled due to the lack of fuel. It also reported an inability to provide ambulances services, citing severe shortage in essential supplies. Additionally, the civil defense accused the Israeli occupation forces of targeting ambulances during their movement in northern Gaza. 12 civilians have been killed and others were injured in the ongoing Israeli strikes on the central and northern Gaza Strip. Local sources reported that 3 civilians were killed and 5 injured in an Israeli shelling near the industrial area of Tel al-Hawa, southwest of Gaza City. Another 3 were killed and 5 injured in an Israeli airstrike on Wahda Street. 5 more civilians died and others were injured in a bombing of a house belonging to the Dahdouha family in the Nusayrat refugee camp. Additionally, 8 civilians were injured in Israeli bombardment of a seaside area west of Deir al-Balah. And for more analysis, we now move to Mark in our newsroom. Mark.
Thank you, Mona. For more analysis of the developments in Gaza, we are joined from Cairo by the Managing Director of Al-Ahram Weekly, Khaled Dawood, who joins us now on Qnews. Thanks for being here with us. Do you think that the current escalation in the Gaza Strip marks a shift in military strategies, or is it a continuation of what's gone before?
Well, unfortunately, Mark, I cannot say it's a shift because this kind of disaster and catastrophe that we're seeing in northern Gaza has been going on right now for nearly 2 months. I mean, for 2 months we've been seeing, this kind of near daily killing of scores of Palestinians. Of course, after the ceasefire that was reached in Lebanon and went into effect, late on Tuesday or early Wednesday. There's been, different speculations on whether Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would be ready to accept ceasefire in Gaza, similar to Lebanon, considering that, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza, the notion of ultimate, utter victory that Netanyahu has been claiming has never been achieved. So, probably there has been a lot of pressure internally right now in Israel saying if you were able to reach a ceasefire in Lebanon without achieving all your goals, why not reach a similar truce in Gaza? So, of course, there might be an expectation for an escalation in the Israeli attacks more than the massacres they've been committing over the past 2 months and the starvation of the Palestinian people, perhaps in preparation for a possible truce, not even like a kind of a real ceasefire, especially before current U.S. President Joe Biden leaves the White House on January 20. So maybe, Netanyahu, with this escalation in the Israeli military establishment, are seeking to put more pressure on Hamas to accept conditions which they have said they would not accept before, such as a ceasefire in return, while they would still have Israeli occupation troops inside Gaza. The issue of maintaining troops along the border between Egypt and Gaza, whether this could happen, the withdrawal of Israeli troops could happen over a gradual mechanism rather than just immediately, as Hamas has asked before. So, again, there are different speculations that whether or not we're going to be able to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, but certainly President Biden, considering his statement yesterday that it would be practically, I am quoting, crazy to continue those daily massacres in Gaza, waiting for Trump to take over on January 20. So maybe we can see some contacts in the coming days and weeks, including Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, in hope of pressing Netanyahu to agree for a ceasefire in Gaza similar to Lebanon. But certainly it won't be on definitely favorable conditions for Hamas after the cessation of hostilities in Lebanon.
Mr. Dawood, do you think that then that this particular intensification in central Gaza is connected to the ceasefire in Lebanon?
Again, you see intensification. I'm really kind of puzzled about this word because today, nearly 70 Palestinians have been killed at least in attacks on Beit Lahia in northern Gaza, which is similar to figures we've had in recent days and weeks. But right now there is this kind of point of view circulating that Israel would escalate attacks in Gaza even further, which means, unfortunately, more killing basically more civilians. There is no, in terms of military targets, Israel has occupied the entire Gaza Strip. There is really nothing more they could do inside Gaza except on killing civilians and destroying homes and destroying houses. There is certainly a very serious fear that Israeli operations, particularly in northern Gaza, are aimed at emptying that part of Gaza, despite the fact that entire Gaza is a very small place, 360 square kilometers.
I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think are Israel's objectives? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, my fear, to be honest with you, on the medium and maybe longer term, to a certain extent, Israel will insist to maintain occupation inside the Gaza Strip, and that if we're going to see any withdrawal, it would be over a gradual kind of long period of time. But I mean, again, we're having an extremely right-wing coalition in Israel right now with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, basically asking for the, annexation of northern Gaza. And you've seen yesterday a government minister visiting the borders between Israel and Gaza, accompanied by top settler leaders, to discuss the chances of rebuilding settlements that were removed in 2005. So maybe within this kind of revenge attitude, revenge spirit that Israel has been having since, October 7, 2023, they kind of see that the punishment for the Gazans would be to confiscate basically part of Gaza and rebuild those kinds of settlements. But perhaps, there might be some sound, voices, some kind of rational, let me say, or sane voices within the security establishment would recognize that, having these kinds of settlements in Gaza means keeping many troops there, being subject to attacks again, as the situation was before 2005. So it's not an easy option to claim that they can, empty northern Gaza and restore settlements there. But unfortunately, again, there are lots of factors at play. The President Biden's remaining nearly 7 weeks in office, Trump taking over with another extreme team. That's another extremely worrying issue. The team that Mr. Trump is bringing in to look over the Middle East, whether the Secretary of State, the UN ambassador, the member of the House, the Stefanik, the Israeli, the American ambassador to Israel, Mr. Mike Huckabee, they are like hardline Zionists, which definitely is not a very positive sign on what kind of settlements we're going to see. So it's a very wide, complicated issue that involves not just Hamas, but Hamas, Iran, all the other actors at play. And I'm afraid that the main victim for all of this will be the Palestinian people. It's very heartbreaking to keep on increasing the numbers of people who are dying there. Just a few days ago, we crossed the 44,000 threshold. Right now, we're getting into 44,500. Soon, we're going to get into 45,000. And all this is happening while the United States, the key supporter for Israel, is not just providing them nonstop with weapons, but also diplomatic cover by preventing UN resolutions coming out from the Security Council, ending one of the worst massacres and genocide wars we've seen in many recent decades.
Well, thank you very much, Khalid Dawood, the managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. And it's back to you, Mona.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark, for the deep analysis here. And back to our bulletin, where Israeli occupation strikes have killed at least 30 Palestinians overnight in the Gaza Strip, most of them in the Nusayrat camp at the center of the enclave. Medics said they had recovered 19 bodies of Palestinians killed in the northern areas of Nusayrat. The rest were killed in the northern and southern areas of the Gaza Strip. Displaced Palestinians in Gaza City are struggling to find basic necessities after evacuating from the northern Gaza. Many have no option but to live in schools turned into shelters that lack food, clean water and other resources. Residents said earlier this month that the Israeli forces raided shelters for the displaced, forcing people out at gunpoint. First responders say they can barely operate because of the Israeli bombardment. Hunger experts have warned earlier this month that there is a strong likelihood that famine is imminent in parts of northern Gaza. Displaced Palestinians queued up with empty pots to receive cooked food from a charity-run kitchen in the central Gaza Strip city of Deir el-Balah. Charities like these are a lifeline as displaced Palestinians struggle to find food due to the limitation on the amount of aid entering the Gaza Strip. Israel's Minister of Housing and Construction has said the Jewish settlement of Gaza was an appropriate response to the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for the country's Prime Minister and former Defense Minister. Israel media stated that the minister repeatedly endorsed re-establishing Jewish settlement in the Gaza Strip after the war ends. The United Nations has marked the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The UN highlighted two harrowing facts on this International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. The ongoing Palestinian refugee crisis remains the world's longest unresolved issue, and Gaza has endured the most intense bombardment of any civilian population since World War II in the past year. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares has stated that the Middle East requires peace, not weapons. Albares denied allegations of Spain selling arms to Israel, confirming that no new arms export licenses have been issued since October 2023. He also revealed that ships carrying weapons bound for Israel are prohibited from docking at Spanish ports. Additionally, Albares underscored the critical role of the UNRWA, describing it as indispensable for delivering humanitarian aid to 2 million Gaza residents and ensuring regional stability.
El Consejo de Ministros ha aprobado el nombramiento de un nuevo embajador de España en Argentina.
The UN Human Rights Office representative for the occupied Palestinian territories, Ajis Sangai, has stated that the United Nations has been unable to deliver any humanitarian aid to northern Gaza due to repeated refusals by Israeli authorities to allow aid convoys to pass. During a weekly press conference at the United Nations office in Geneva, Sangai emphasized the severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza, warning that the population is facing the imminent threats of hunger, disease, and death. He noted that approximately 70,000 people are still trapped in northern Gaza, unable to receive vital supplies. The World Food Programme, the WFP, has stated today that all bakeries in central Gaza Strip have been forced to shut down due to a critical shortage of supplies. In a statement on X, the WFP said that bread, which had been often the only food source for many families in Gaza, is now out of reach for residents. The WFP urgently appealed for the sale and uninterpreted delivery of essential humanitarian aid to Gaza, underscoring the urgent need to provide access to vital supplies for the vulnerable population. More than 60 British MPs have sent a letter to the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, urging him to impose sanctions on Israel over repeated violations of international law. The letter references the International Court of Justice advisory opinion from July, which declared Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory unlawful and called for it to end as soon as possible. The MPs are urging the UK government to impose sanctions and take other actions to implement the ICJ's ruling. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, has stressed that the plight of the Palestinian refugees, remains the longest unresolved refugee crisis in the whole world. UNRWA emphasized that since October 2023, the Gaza Strip has been experiencing the most intense bombardment of a civilian population since the World War II. The agency further highlighted the critical need for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to halt the devastating impact on civilians.
الهدفين هن مدنيين.
الوضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Lebanon's national news agency has reported that 4 Israeli tanks have entered the western side of the border village of Hiyam. The agency also confirmed that an Israeli artillery shelling on the outskirts of Markable and Toulouse. The Israeli occupation army has warned Lebanese citizens against returning to 20 villages that were previously untouched during its ground operation in southern Lebanon. Army spokesperson Afichai Drai issued a broader warning on X, ordering citizens to avoid 62 villages across a 500 square kilometers area in the south. Residents of Nabateya in southern Lebanon have begun returning to their homes after the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Amid widespread destruction, homeowners and business owners are assessing the severe damage caused by Israeli strikes in the heavily impacted city. Israel's military has warned the public to avoid evacuated areas near the Lebanon's border in the northern Galilee region. The occupation military warned that unexploded ordnance could still be present and advised the public to stay out of restricted areas, allowing security forces to carry out their operations. British intelligence has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of using nuclear threats to instill fear regarding Western support for Ukraine. It also alleged the discovery of a reckless Russian sabotage campaign in Europe. The agency warned that if Putin succeeds in turning Ukraine into a client state, his ambitions will likely extend further. The Kremlin has stated that deploying peacekeeping forces in Ukraine is only feasible with the consent of both parties in the conflict. The Kremlin has further justified targeting Ukraine's energy sector as a response to Western missile strikes on Russian territories. Additionally, the Kremlin criticized Japan's unfriendly actions, claiming they completely obstruct peace treaty negotiations between the two nations. Germany has offered to redeploy Patriot air defense systems to Poland at the start of the new year. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has stated that the redeployment of Patriot air defense systems to Poland could last for up to 6 months. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. President Sisi reaffirms full support for Palestinian rights on the International Day of Solidarity. The Israeli occupation commits a new massacre in the town of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip, killing at least 10 civilians and injuring others. And Lebanon's national news agency reports 4 Israeli tanks entered the western side of the border village of Hiyam. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.